Hi, welcome to this webinar, another webinar about WordPress with David Vogelpohl. Now I can say your name. Third time we've been on screen together. Absolutely lovely, the first two. This is going to be brilliant. What do you think, David?
I'm really looking forward to it. I've enjoyed the webinar so far. And Jason, you've gotten much better at pronouncing my last name.
and today the topic is Gutenberg. And I love the idea getting getting your content creators out of jail or out of the what do you call it exactly?
The backlog jail. Basically, dev teams have a backlog of things they need to get to, and a lot of times those content teams have their ideas kind of stuck there while the dev team does whatever they have on their plate. And so today's talk is really around how Gutenberg helps to give that power back to the content team.
Yeah, I think as SEO professionals or content developers, we have had that problem in the past with WordPress, and Gutenberg is really, as you say, a get out of jail free card for a lot of us, and it's changing a lot of our lives. I mean, Sarah, lovely to meet you. You were saying that you work with Gutenberg every day. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We do at the Brand ID. We work with Gutenberg every day when we build client websites, and we also have created some themes that use the block first approach.
Okay, brilliant. And so you're developing, or you're doing the content, or both?
It depends. We develop and we do content for our clients also.
Okay, brilliant. So you are super duper expert. You're in Maine, in America, which now I know is in the top left-hand corner.
Yes, yeah.
Right-hand corner.
Oh, right-hand corner.
Yeah, right-hand corner.
Depending on how you orient the globe, Luke might orient it the other way, and then it would be on the left.
Yeah.
And why Luke would orient it the other way is because he's in Australia. It's 3 a.m. He's got a big cup of coffee, and he's as close as I've ever got to meeting Mr. Gutenberg. Please tell us, Luke.
Good morning. I don't know if I'd classify myself as Mr. Gutenberg, but yeah, I've been involved in the project for a little while now, since the early days. My day-to-day is for a plugin called Backlog, which I co-founded in November before Gutenberg was released. And Backlog helps freelancers and agencies create custom blocks for their clients using just traditional WordPress templating.
Which is absolutely brilliant, because we've got this idea with Gutenberg. I think that we're kind of limited to what Gutenberg will already offer us, and that can be quite limited. And some content people are quite frustrated. And being able to pass a relatively simple task over to the developers to actually do what we want to do in terms of design is incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. We've just discovered time and time again as we talk to different people that the barrier for entry to developers for creating a custom block was so high, having to learn React, get your head around build tools, and a whole bunch of other things. So we wanted to make it much easier.
Yeah, you're the kind of halfway house between pure developers and pure content people, allowing the less enthusiastic, talented developers like myself. I think I would probably benefit greatly from your plugin.
Yeah, nicely put.
Okay. Oh, I'll give it a go afterwards. I didn't really know about that. Quick word to the audience before we get going. I think probably everyone who's going to join us has joined us. If you have any questions, post them into the chat. We will answer them as we go along if it's appropriate, or right at the end. David's going to give a presentation. He's going to allow and ask Sarah and Luke questions to get the thing flowing. If you have specific questions about things we're talking about, post them very quickly, and we'll try to get them in as we go along. Otherwise, we'll get to them at the end. So I think I can hand it over to you now, David.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jason. And as you pointed out, I'm going to walk through some of the content here with some visual examples, but really leaning on Sarah and Luke to kind of help me fill in the details here. We'll go ahead and kick off. So for those of you unfamiliar with me, I'm David Vogelpohl. I'm on the senior leadership team at WP Engine. You may know me from a few of the projects I work on. I lead the Genesis business unit within inside of WP Engine, contribute back to the WordPress community. Have led teams that have built various plugins, including the Amazon AI plugin for WordPress, the Cloudflare Stream plugin, which is a block-first plugin for videos, and then, of course, I host a podcast called Press This on Webmaster Radio. What I'm here to talk to you today about is, of course, the Gutenberg editor, now called the block editor in WordPress, codenamed Gutenberg, and this is quite nuanced, but really, how do we leverage the new block editor to deliver on that promise of empowering content creators and kind of getting out of backlog jail? So to start, we need to kind of understand, well, what does backlog jail mean? When I first joined WP Engine back in 2010, one of the first teams I led was our internal web team, the team that made and designed our websites. And this is how a typical design project would look for us. We'd have an idea for a new type of landing page or web page. We'd meet with the designer. They'd make a wireframe. We'd have a meeting about the wireframe. They would ultimately create a design based on the wireframe. We'd have a meeting about the design. The designer would make tweaks. The developer would code the design. And then we'd change our minds anyways as stakeholders, and they would uncode and recode that design. And at the end of the day, or probably 3 weeks worth of time, we'd have made one new web page design. And so this is the process that I think a lot of teams live with in WordPress and beyond. Sarah, I know at Brand ID, you serve customers through kind of the themes you distribute, but also kind of on an individual client basis. Does this bring back any memories about how you've worked in the past or may even still work today in some contexts?
Yeah, definitely. That's the way we worked up until we started using Gutenberg more. I mean, there's still a back and forth process. I don't think that there ever will be when a designer and a developer are collaborating, but it makes the changing of the design on the development aspect much easier.
Exactly. So really, as we think about workflows like this, which I'm sure are familiar to many of you, again, the time needed to achieve one new design, one new layout, one new approach can be quite overwhelming and can slow down your ability to try new ideas. And so what the typical web page design, in my view, really looks like is this. And I have my own ideas and backlogs of development teams right now, as I'm sure many of you do. But what most of your time spent on a design project is actually waiting for your dev team to get to it. So in other words, you need those designers, you need those developers to help. Well, so do a lot of other people in your org. And of course, they have their own tasks like maintaining this website or adding a new functionality or something like that. And so your idea will often kind of get shuffled into the backlog and may or may not get the priority you feel it deserves. And of course, until it's worked on, you're sitting there waiting. Luke, how big is your backlog on any given day? Like dozens of tickets, hundreds of tickets? Like where does that fall for you just in any particular project or effort?
Yeah, it's a constant struggle to get on top of the backlog. I try to keep it to one page, but at the moment it's 2 pages, so it must be like over 40 different items.
Yeah, and some teams that's a lot more. And the other thing to think about is that with a lot of development teams, they're really wanting to push the edge about what they can do, meaning new capabilities, new integrations, new ways of doing things. It challenges them intellectually. And when you load up that backlog with a bunch of landing page tickets, this can often kind of drag down the team that develops your site because those aren't challenging projects for them. I often call these soul-crushing landing page tickets because your advanced designers and developers are not just like dying to code that next landing page for you. Sarah, does that ring true for you? Is that like what you can't wait to do next is design that next landing page? Or
yeah, no. Yeah, I think as developers, we live for, figuring out the next big thing for development, but yeah, the landing pages are just, more like data entry.
Exactly. And you look at processes like this, and it kind of takes a long time to really produce one simple page, not really challenging for your design and development team. If your backlog is full of landing page tickets, that can actually cause morale issues with your team, may lead to retention issues, keeping those people around. So nobody likes being stuck in the backlog jail, especially for landing page tickets. Now, of course, historically, WordPress has been a really good tool for escaping backlog jail. The reason why more websites on the internet use it, is because it's so easy to create content and has been historically. The classic editor or the WYSIWYG, as we used to call it, I suppose, in the old version of WordPress pre-Gutenberg, in my view, excelled at what I call Word doc web pages. And the classic editor has bold and the ability to put in shortcodes and widgets, but it really fundamentally isn't what we might think of when we talk about a page builder or building very complex types of web pages and designs. In the video you're looking at here, the user's trying to put two images side by side, which actually should be a pretty easy task. But as you can see in the GIF, this user's actually kind of having a really big problem with that. Luke, you've actually also used this notion of like Word doc web pages in the past. Why did that resonate with you?
I mean, absolutely. You just look at the editor, that classic editor, and the whole metaphor that it's using there with the toolbar is straight out of Microsoft Word. And so moving to something different like the block editor, it for me just opens up so many different possibilities. I use Gutenberg to build out sites. I use it to build blog posts and all that sort of thing. And just having the flexibility to break out of the box and go wider, just something as simple as that really sort of opens your mind to displaying content in really fresh, bold, interesting ways. And it breaks you out of the Word text area box, which makes me really excited.
Yeah, it's interesting. Back in the day, believe it or not, I don't know if this is still true in Microsoft Word, but you could actually save a Word doc as an HTML file. Mm-hmm. And I've actually built a website doing that way back in the day. A real quick website for a co-ed soccer team I was on, just, the schedule and stuff like that. And it was sort of difficult because you could design it and kind of save it out as an HTML file, and essentially do design in it, but it wasn't perfect. There were little nuances to getting it to work right. You still have to kind of fiddle with the HTML a little bit. And that's essentially the way the classic editor worked. We all had our kind of workarounds for that, but fundamentally it really wasn't a design tool. And so
what strikes me here, sorry to interrupt, but a lot of the complaints I saw right at the beginning at Gutenberg was it's terribly limiting. And in fact, what I've just heard now is it's completely the opposite.
I believe so. I mean, the core blocks, which we'll get to here in a little bit, they're finite, right? There's only so many of them. And so when people first started testing it in the early versions, they were like, oh, these limited number of things that are available to me don't really get the job done. So this isn't helpful. But WordPress is an open CMS. And so providers or people that make products like BlockLab and Luke here help to augment that and make it more powerful. And then what we're also going to cover a little later on is your dev team can make blocks for you. So I don't view it limiting at all. As a matter of fact, I view the classic editor, as you pointed out, Jason, as much more limiting. But yeah, that first blush of, oh, what am I going to do with these 15 or 20 blocks doesn't really tell the whole story. And so some of those early takes on it might have just been a little maybe uninformed as to maybe what was coming in, what the capabilities were. Another thing that WordPress excelled at pre-Gutenberg were custom post types with custom meta fields. And the easiest way to think about this is with an e-commerce site. This screenshot from sellwithwp.com is a normal WooCommerce page. We have a picture, an alternative photo, a title of the product, a price, a description, and there's other metadata associated with this type of page or type of post within the WordPress context. And so from an end user, content creator's perspective, these types of pages are very easy to edit. You're just going to go into the back end. There's going to be fields for each of these pieces of data, and you're just going to fill it in. And then on the front end, the template will essentially style out the view, the design that you see here. So this is really helpful for creating the same kind of page over and over again, like a e-commerce site or a directory. But if you want to change the design, often in these types of web pages, your choices are very limited. You can change the picture, but you can't change where it's positioned. You can change the title, but you can't change it from, say, an H2 to an H3, those kinds of edits that you might want to do as an SEO or as a designer or as a content creator. I think I already know the answer to this, but Luke, you've used custom post types with custom metadata, I'm sure, just thousands of times, right? This was like core to your building before Gutenberg.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really taken for me a whole change in mindset coming to Gutenberg. As a WordPress developer and building out content, you start to think architecturally, what have I got to work with? I've got custom post types, I've got custom meta, and I can do templates. And if I want to do some interesting content pieces, maybe I want to create 3 columns with an icon in each column and a button. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, the only way I can really do that is to create a page template that allows for that and add some custom meta fields in there. And that's always been how we've thought as WordPress developers. Gutenberg's allowed us to add this new idea, this new paradigm into our thinking and break different sections of a page template out into reusable areas, blocks.
Yeah, that's a great point. And this capability that we're seeing here on this slide, this notion of kind of a custom type of page or post with custom metadata, fundamentally changed how people viewed WordPress. These capabilities essentially were released in 2010. And this was when a lot of the products, a lot of the brands in the WordPress ecosystem came to be, as these capabilities really opened up WordPress, and from my view, into being a modular and kind of extensible CMS. And so this was a powerful moment in WordPress's history. And now that we're 1 year into Gutenberg, you're really, frankly, seeing it now. This isn't even a prediction. The same kind of explosion with new capabilities and new products in the WordPress ecosystem. But the problem is that these are modular pages, repeating pages, same kind of design over and over again with different content. And so even with these capabilities in core and the classic editor, your new ideas for new designs were still stuck in backlog jail. You still had to go through that whole flow to get a new layout, to get a new design, to get a new piece of content that looked good. It wasn't a hack job in the classic editor. So how does the new block editor help us escape from that backlog jail? I want to kind of walk through a little bit about how that looks. And WP Engine drinks our own champagne. In the dev world, you might say eats our own dog food, but basically uses these approaches ourselves. But I really kind of want to illustrate philosophically what this means, as Luke pointed out, a change in mindset, but also how that connects back to how developers and designers already operate. So,
hold on a second. Isn't WP Engine based in Austin, Texas?
We are based in Austin, yes.
Yeah. So wouldn't it be drinks your own craft beer?
Craft beer, that's another good one. Eat our own breakfast tacos, any of that stuff, I think would be fantastic. I like that actually a lot better. So we're going to go with eat our own breakfast tacos, I suppose, or craft beer, either way. So anyways, as I was pointing out, Gutenberg really completes, in my view, the componentized approaches your dev team already uses. So I think this is important to understand because development and design teams have long used componentized approaches to building. Every time they make a landing page or a new design, they don't just throw away all that code, throw away all those designs. Many teams will save those as essentially components that they can reuse over and over and over again. Sarah, does this ring true to you? Have you been using componentized approaches to creating new web experiences like since you began, pretty much?
Yeah, definitely. I can't even count how many code snippets I have saved everywhere. So yeah, Gutenberg has allowed us to make that much easier to implement on the WordPress website.
Exactly. So this isn't foreign, this notion of componentized site building or page building. It's just that these snippets are kind of stored away in different methods by your dev team. Their design files, again, are kind of maybe stored and organized in a certain way to allow those designers and developers to reuse that work and move faster. The only problem was that unless you had a very specific type of page with very specific metadata, the end user couldn't really customize on top of that. So what Gutenberg does, again, in my view, is kind of extending this notion of componentized building all the way to the content creator. So now the pieces of your web page are no longer componentized and usable only by designers and developers, but also by the content creator. So again, nothing foreign here, this notion of componentized building to your design and dev team. It's just that Gutenberg essentially allows them to connect that approach all the way through to the content creation piece. And what you have is experiences like what you're seeing here. This GIF is showing the use of a plugin called Atomic Blocks. Atomic Blocks essentially, it's free, it's on WordPress.org, but it's a collection of blocks that allow you to kind of grab sections and inject them into a page or even individual blocks. And so by using these approaches, what content creators are able to do is to leverage that componentized approach right in the page creation process. So they can change how the title might be tagged, they can change the design, they can certainly change the content. And again, it takes that componentized approach and extends it all the way down to the end user.
So are we looking, excuse me, David, are we looking at a situation where things like WP Bakery and Atomic are no longer necessary?
WP Bakery and other page builders like Beaver Builder and Elementor are still, in my view, valuable products. Gutenberg enables similar capabilities within WordPress core, and the other page builders that are available in the ecosystem are a different answer to a similar type of problem. Now, those products have some really powerful features in them that Gutenberg and WordPress core don't have. Having the capabilities in core itself makes it easier for plugin developers to add these kinds of capabilities to their plugins without having to necessarily worry about every subvariant of every page builder. But I think ultimately it's up for the agency or the brand to choose what approach they want to kind of go with in terms of fulfilling the needs of their brand or their customers. But yes, it would be very similar to, say, what a WP Bakery does.
Well, that
page builder.
Yeah, sorry, that then leads me to a question which is for Luke. Would I not, if I'm using WP Bakery or Atomic, which Melissa was saying earlier on, it creates problems with the updates because they're using Atomic and there's some kind of conflict for her in this situation, would I not do better to move everything over to Gutenberg and use a plugin like yours to help my developers to develop the special functionality that you were talking about, David? Is that a good idea or a bad idea, Luke?
Well, I just want to call out firstly that Atomic is maybe doesn't fit into this paradigm of a page builder. Atomic is more around custom blocks, adding new blocks rather that extends the existing blocks that are already inside of WordPress. So actually, Atomic works really, really nicely alongside Gutenberg.
Okay.
But in terms of, to answer your question though, around WP Bakery, I was sitting on a panel recently actually at the WordCamp Sydney, a big WordPress conference here in Australia. And the question was asked, how many page builders should I be using? Which was a kind of funny question because I didn't realize that people stack page builders together sometimes. My answer was well, depending on your use case, but mostly 0, because Gutenberg can get the job done 90% of the time, in my experience. And there are so many other advantages to using the native WordPress editor. One of them you touched on is that you're not going to be affected by WordPress updates. And there's a bunch more that just make your site more solid, more maintainable, and I think more accessible to the end user as well, to the editor.
Yeah, that's a great point, Luke. Sorry, Jason, go ahead.
No, I think that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, for me, fundamentally, I look at WordPress and I see the plugins people are installing. I think if you can stick as close as you can to the WordPress core, you're going to be winning all the way down the line because you're saving yourself so many problems with the updates and you're sticking to something that everybody else is using. So there's loads of resources out there to help you and a lot of saving graces. I'm not a great expert in this, but you're saying, can I try and stick as close to the WordPress core as possible? That's a good thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of Elementor or WP Bakery users might not realize Gutenberg's capabilities in terms of groups and columns, which didn't exist, or at least didn't work very well in the very, very first version of Gutenberg that was released and have been improved quite a lot since. And I'm very confident. In fact, I've done it a number of times now in building out a sort of these standard page builder templates completely inside Gutenberg.
Yeah, and Sarah, we haven't heard from you for a moment. I mean, you would agree with that, I take it.
Yeah, we aren't relying on any page builders anymore. We're just using Gutenberg for everything. We have in the past used plenty of the page builders with good results, but now we're able to just use Gutenberg as we need.
Brilliant. Sorry, I'll pass back to you, David. I interrupted.
No, these are perfect points. The other thing I'll point out real quickly is that Atomic Blocks, the plugin that you're seeing here, as Luke pointed out, leverages Gutenberg. So it's kind of augmenting Gutenberg and kind of building on top of it. The second thing is that there are some page builders, in particular Elementor, that also kind of leverage some of the Gutenberg capabilities, so more tightly integrated with core. And I'm sure, as Luke can attest, just because your plugin or even your custom blocks are kind of tied into core capabilities doesn't mean you're immune from WordPress updates. It's still up to you as a team and you as a plugin author to kind of keep up with what happens as WordPress evolves. So you're not totally immune. And actually, there are some benefits to kind of being locked in a sort of pseudo-proprietary page builder. But again, generally speaking, sticking to core is not a bad idea. The other thing that is, I think, really cool about these types of approaches is the fact that your content team not only can leverage the components or the blocks to build a page, to design a page, to lay out a page, but they can also inherit optimizations, integrations, and functionality your dev team has done. Meaning that if they've optimized the blocks for SEO, if they've optimized them for speed, if they've added an integration to a particular block for whatever reason, or you use a plugin with an integration like what we're seeing here with Yoast, every time your content team uses that block, they inherit all of those things. The Yoast block we're looking at here is called a structured data block. And this is really designed around, this particular block is designed around creating essentially a how-to using schema's markup for schema.org's markup for how-to content. And then essentially in certain views inside of Google, of course, I think as many folks know that are regulars for SEMrush webinars, it basically enables that content to be parsed and displayed more easily or in certain areas within Google search results and other search engines as well. But this, I think, is one of the neat pieces of Gutenberg, is that those blocks contain functionality, integrations, and optimizations that your content team can reuse and in many cases customize. Is that something that y'all played much with, Sarah? This notion of like smart blocks or integrated blocks or functional blocks?
Yeah, that's part of the awesomeness of Gutenberg. Our content team is able to reuse blocks over and over again, but also from a client's standpoint, they're able to replicate the same design and functionality throughout the website that before would have been so hard for them to understand and to keep recreating.
You mean like copying and pasting a short code is not intuitive to a lot of content creators?
Yeah, or div classes, and you just make sure you use, instead of using you make sure you're looking at the code part. Yeah, so that's much easier now, much
more intuitive, right? I mean, the short codes helped people embed functionality, which was neat, like forms and stuff. But even just as you created the page, of course, you'd have to kind of pop off to the preview view to even see how that looked.
Right.
And so in my view, Gutenberg really delivers, the block editor really delivers a much more WYSIWYG-like experience. What you see is what you get like experience than the previous way we might edit a page or add functionality to a page.
I think that's an absolutely brilliant point. I'd just like to cut in there with the Yoast idea and the idea of blocks. If you guys know Cindy Crum, she talks about Fraggles, and I love this idea. Joan Alderson from Yoast talks about blocks. I talk about chunks. Cindy Crum talks about Fraggles, and the idea is you've got a fragment of content, a fragment, a block, or a chunk, which is what a Gutenberg block is, with a handle that Google can use to reach in, get the handle, pull it up, and put it in the SERP. And I've used the Yoast FAQ markup to maybe trick Google, not a fair word, but get featured snippets. If you search for who is Cindy Crum, who is Jonah Alderson, or who is Lauren Baker, my site either has the featured snippet or ranks 1, 2, or 3. And that shows A, the power of blocks with handles, Fraggles, but B, the power of Yoast's particular blocks for those FAQ questions. So I think what is very powerful, what I've found there, is that Gutenberg has empowered Yoast to empower me to get those featured snippets and get myself to the top of the rankings with absolutely no authority on these people at all. And I do apologize to them if they're upset.
Well, that's really good to hear. And I mean, I think that's a great story to be illustrative of the fact that Gutenberg isn't just a tool that enables you to create, say, a new layout, a new design, a new type of content, but also enables you to kind of scale this notion of functionality, integrations, and optimizations, where you don't necessarily have to dig into the code or use confusing shortcodes in order to build out a page that's more than just a design. And I think this is one of the most powerful parts of this new approach in the WordPress context. For us, I mentioned earlier that we eat our own breakfast tacos. And we implemented a similar approach a little over a year ago. And within the last 12 months, roughly, slide's a couple months old now, but our content creators made over 2,000 different landing pages, web pages, product pages, and they only needed a developer's help on 24 of them. This means that the development team was able to allow the content team to basically go from idea to reality, digital reality, in like one day instead of that 3-week process, which freed up their backlog and allowed them to bring their ideas or their improvements to the site to life faster by freeing up all those soul-crushing landing page tickets from their backlog. I think another interesting thing to point out here is that Gutenberg isn't just used by content creators to make new pages and new designs. Luke, do you use Gutenberg to actually make a new web page and design, or are you like going into the code every time to make a new web page?
No, I absolutely use Gutenberg to build out a new design. And I would say with this stat here, the ratio over time is going to increase with more web pages built independently, because the more your developers have built blocks, the more they can be reused. So that's only going to look better over time. Actually, I had a client recently who had designed a template for the homepage that they wanted to build, and they were asking me how long it was going to take to build out the template. And I looked at them a little perplexed for a second, and I said, here, come and watch this. And we got onto their WordPress together and started a new page, called it Front Page. And we built out the exact design that they'd had in mind. There were a few small little caveats, a few small little tweaks, but essentially, we put the header block at the top. We made it the full width and gave it a parallax effect. We did that with the default block. We put in a bit of paragraph text below that and a center aligned button below that. And then below that, we could put in the 3 columns and insert an image into each column at the top. And we put an icon in there and some more text and some more buttons. And just using Gutenberg alone, we built out this page template, the homepage, for this client in maybe like five minutes.
I love it. I love it. Everybody loves an easy button. It's not just a tool that content creators use. It's also a tool that developers use to build new experiences. So in addition to kind of freeing up the backlog from those soul-crushing landing page tickets, developers actually are using Gutenberg to move faster in the projects that they take on. Now, with all of this efficiency here, like we're not taking 3 weeks to make a web page anymore, and the content creators are kind of doing it without a ton of help from the developers or the designers. You might think that we didn't need as many developers anymore. Sarah, did you hear this? When Gutenberg was released, designers and developers weren't going to have jobs anymore?
Yes.
Yes, right. No, actually, don't lay off your web developers. You still need them. You need them even more now. As a matter of fact, when we implemented these approaches, we actually hired more developers. Now, you might think, well, why did you do that if you didn't need their help on as many web pages anymore? The reason was because the work they were doing was more valuable. They were creating more components for those content creators to use and reuse, more integrations, making them better. We have, for example, a component, a block that puts our pricing grid on a page. So they added functionality to that to change the pricing if there was a coupon involved, to allow them to add co-branding, certain kinds of customizations, the way the pricing grid would work. And I mean, now the ideas are like, how can I come up with new components that the content team can reuse to drive value even faster? And so that value really drove us to expand the team, not to contract the team. And the work that both the content team and the development team are doing are more valuable, and we're able to get those ideas, again, from idea to reality in a much shorter period of time. So for us, it didn't mean laying off anyone. It meant the exact opposite. Luke, you're going to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I love that you've empowered your development team to be proactive instead of reactive.
Oh, absolutely. They have their own ideas. The content creators are now coming up with ideas for blocks. So there's still this exchange of ideas and technology between the developers and the content creators. It's just that the minutia of building every single page no longer falls to the developers. So they're able to add new integrations, new blocks, new scalable innovation in a way that drives more value than they did before. So for us, it led to hiring more of them, not laying them off. So certainly would encourage you to pursue a similar strategy, again, to get more value out of the people you have, and then hopefully even justify that to expand that team. So I want to now shift gears into building your block arsenal, some tips for learning how to build blocks. The first one is to think about leveraging core blocks. Luke, a minute ago, explained how he built that page for the client using the blocks that come with Gutenberg inside of WordPress, or the new block editor, if you would. And then you can also leverage blocks that come from what are essentially block library plugins like Atomic Blocks. There's another one out there called Co-Blocks. But these are kind of like what you might consider like premium block libraries. But basically, someone else makes the blocks for you and you use them is the fundamental idea behind this strategy. The benefits, of course, you kind of get the blocks for free. You don't have to do a lot of work to use them. And then other people will maintain them, meaning that in the case of core blocks, the WordPress core team maintains them. And in the case of a plugin like Atomic Blocks, that team fundamentally maintains them, makes sure they work with the new versions of WordPress, adds features and capabilities to them. So all of that maintenance work doesn't have to fall to you. Of course, we talked earlier about the Yoast structured data block, but there's lots of other blocks that come included with plugins. Give, which is the most popular donations plugin for WordPress, has this example of essentially a fundraising, grid of blocks. But a lot of plugins will include blocks specific to them that you can leverage as you start building out a site. So watch for your favorite plugins, see what blocks they have included. Again, it's kind of free maintenance. That team creates them and maintains them for you. So you don't have to mess with that too much. Luke, just real quick, or maybe Sarah, let me switch it up. What's like your the best block you've seen that kind of come bundled with a plugin? Or the best plugin author, I suppose, you've seen it kind of embracing blocks in this way?
Oh, I don't know. We use a lot of different ones. I know that definitely now when I'm looking for a plugin, if I have a choice between one that utilizes blocks, I'm going to choose that one. I know that we use Atomic Blocks on every single site, and the container block is, the way that we build most of our sites. I'm trying to think of what we've used recently.
There's so much capabilities with those core blocks and then libraries like Atomic Blocks, and of course, creating your own blocks. You don't really have to rely on any particular plugin to deliver an experience. Right. It sounds like you just have, it was still early days, right? Just over the first year roughly with Gutenberg. So it makes sense. It hasn't come to top of mind yet. But within the plugins you choose, of course, there are often blocks-based approaches to adding that functionality to your site. You can also build your own custom blocks, 100% custom, just for you. And there's a few ways to go about that. So these next set of slides kind of unpack that. The first,
Sorry, David, just before we get on to that, I have a question. I think it's quite important. I think Luke was suggesting that maybe Sarah can help us here. I think obviously these blocks are incredibly important, but a lot of people are asking themselves about the relationship between the design and the blocks, and how useful can CSS be to affect the design of these blocks. Sarah, have you got something to say about that? Because I think people are worried that CSS is going out the window and they have no control anymore.
Yeah, most of the blocks, you're able to add a CSS class to them. And just by doing that, we can add in styling into the style sheet. We do that throughout. And for an end user's point of view, training somebody to add a CSS class, even if we're not making it a reusable block, is much easier than, telling them that they have to use div classes and this. They just have to add a word into the class section.
Brilliant. So CSS becomes even more powerful and more useful. Thank you very much. Sorry, David, I just wanted to do that before we got into the customization. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. And of course, the blocks themselves do have design controls within them. So, users are able to, of course, also use the design controls within the blocks themselves. Now, in terms of building your own custom blocks, I'm going to have three things I'm going to kind of talk about real quickly. And I highly recommend the third option. But the first choice when thinking, or first option when thinking about building custom blocks, is to RTFM, or read the freaking manual. And in this case, the freaking manual is the block editor handbook found on WordPress.org. You can follow the little URL link there at the bottom to access, to find the block editor handbook. But it walks through everything you're going to need to learn to basically build with blocks, including examples, code snippets, and things like that. The next option is this essentially tool called Create Gutenberg Block that was made right when Gutenberg was released. It's, again, a developer tool, really focused on building Gutenberg blocks, particularly with React, which of course that's how they're built. But it's kind of a neat build tool, if you would, for learning how to build custom blocks, something your developer can check out. This is my favorite, especially for those without or with dev teams that aren't strong in React. And that's, of course, Block Lab. And the way I like to think about it is it abstracts out the hard parts of block creation by allowing those kind of PHP WordPress developers to stay anchored in places where they're comfortable. Luke, obviously you're with Block Lab, founder of Block Lab. So could you help kind of unpack a little bit more around kind of how Block Lab works?
Sure. I think I would start with just by saying that one of the major inspirations for Block Lab in the first place was advanced custom fields. It's a plugin that's very well known, very popular, that developers and website creators would use, that use this interface within the WordPress admin to build out custom fields and have them available in a post. And we realized that entering this new world of Gutenberg, it doesn't always make as much sense. Or sometimes custom meta is actually helpful, but a lot of the time what we really want is a block. So we created an interface within the WordPress admin to be able to build out exactly what fields you want to appear in your block. And then also added a really simple templating system. It's HTML, CSS with a few little PHP tags, actually pretty similar to a standard WordPress page template. But only just for that one block. And so it becomes really easy to create custom blocks.
Nice. Thanks for that explanation. Sarah, how did you learn to create blocks? Did you read the Block Editor Handbook? Did you try something like Create Gutenberg Block? Have you played Block Lab yet? Like, how did you learn JavaScript deeply in order to embrace this Gutenberg world?
Reading the manual, but also I have not tried Block Lab. I have used Advanced Custom Fields has an option now to create blocks. We've used that, but I'm definitely interested in taking a bigger look at Block Lab, because I mean, the whole premise of Gutenberg is to help speed everything up and make everything more intuitive. And I think that using a tool like Block Lab, instead of recreating the wheel every single time you need a custom block, is much easier.
Yeah, I think this is one of the kind of high level meta issues, if you would, with the new block editor, is that for the most part, especially if you don't use a tool like Backlog, your development team is going to have to learn the React JavaScript framework. And for a lot of developers, that's going to be brand new to them. And there's a barrier of entry there in learning. Now, for all those React developers flooding out of coding schools these days, this is great news, because how they learn to build is now more native and part of WordPress. But for a lot of WordPress development teams, this is brand new stuff. So tools like Backlog help to bridge the gap between the technology that they may not have time to learn and how they're kind of used to building. And so,
yeah, and I also think that it's not so scary because it looks similar. I know that before blocks, we used advanced custom fields for almost everything. So it looks similar to the way that we used to do it. And so the entry into figuring it out is much easier.
Exactly. So these are some of the ways you can start thinking about building custom blocks. I'm going to give a couple examples real quick about how innovation is kind of getting started with blocks. And then I want to open it up to Q&A. Jason, I hope you have some good ones queued up. But I wanted to give some examples, though, before we kick into that. So first of all, of course, theme providers are embracing Gutenberg and how they build. This is one of the themes that Sarah here makes with the brand ID. It's called Course Maker Pro, and it leverages basically a block-first approach to the theme. The demo content loads in about 30 seconds using a feature in the theme framework Genesis called One-Click Theme Setup, and basically everything is ready to start editing in seconds. And so including the content in these very intuitive block-based interfaces. And it just is such a delight for the end user to kind of switch between these long setup processes to load demo content, and then figure out how to edit all the little bits and bobs into this approach where it looks like my web page, and I can change the design in really material ways. Sarah, did this like drastically change how y'all thought about building themes?
Yeah, definitely. We realized early on that Gutenberg was going to be an important aspect of building themes. We have one dev who that's what he does, is he's converting all of our themes. He converted Course Maker Pro. It used to not be Gutenberg block first. And we just knew that that was the way to ensure that the theme was easy for users to use. And also that, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people purchase a theme, customize it the best that they can, and it doesn't look anything like what you wanted it to look like. So this way, it's so much easier for the end user to have what they thought that they were going to get when they purchased it. You know, it makes it so much easier for the end user. And from a theme perspective, that's really what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I called that kind of event of installing a theme on your website and it looks nothing like the demo site. It's very hard to edit. I call that the most annoying problem on the internet.
Yeah.
Gutenberg has kind of helped to solve that, which is cool. Theme providers like the brand ID doing a good job at embracing that. Plugin providers are also delivering what I consider to be some really cool options with blocks. WooCommerce is an example of that. Of course, Automatic is the company behind WooCommerce, as well as, maybe not the company, but Matt Mullenweg, the CEO of Automatic, of course, is one of the co-founders of WordPress, obviously fully embracing the capabilities within WordPress core and their products. Adjacent platforms are integrating with WordPress using blocks. So BigCommerce has a plugin that essentially extends the capabilities of the BigCommerce e-commerce platform into the WordPress context. And they built this plugin right when Gutenberg was getting started. And so they also chose a block first approach to building out those integrations. I mentioned earlier one of the plugins that I've been honored to lead a team that ultimately built is this Cloudflare Stream plugin, which I think is a really neat example of offloading and integrations, making blocks more powerful. Offloading is basically pushing work or data to another thing, so that way your WordPress has less work to do and therefore your website's faster. In this particular plugin, what it does is it allows you to use blocks to add videos to your site, and those videos are stored in the Cloudflare video CDN, and then are essentially lightning fast for your users. And this is just like one of the examples of offloading and integrations. The Yoast schema block was another example of this, kind of this notion of integrations and functionality. What's next for the block builder? We're seeing rapid updates to the Gutenberg plugin. So for those unaware, there's a plugin. It's called a feature plugin. Basically has the future features for the Gutenberg editor, but it's called the Gutenberg plugin. And one of there's rapid development going on there, but I think some of the key areas for people to keep an eye on is the capabilities of adding the block editor to control the header experience, the sidebar experience, and the footer. And then also this notion of a block directory, similar to how we might have a plugin directory that presumably would be available on WordPress.org, just like plugins. There's a bunch of stuff going on in the block world. So it's more, of course, than we can kind of cover in this presentation and on this slide. But I think the big boulders to watch out for are headers and menus, or navigation being editable with the block editor, the sidebar, and the footer. Again, extending those capabilities throughout the entire site. So that's it for the content. I hope we have some really good questions lined up, Jason.
Yeah, that was absolutely brilliant, David. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Luke. The very last point, in fact, I can come back to that because there was a slightly ambiguous question of, can Gutenberg help with the head? And it wasn't very clear whether the person meant the header or the HTML head, i.e. the code above that we don't actually see. I think, Luke, you were discussing that in the chat. Excuse me. Could you give us some pointers on that?
Yeah, so of course the HTML head is outside of our design, and it's not really in the realm of Gutenberg. But on the topic of what about the header for the website? Well, right now, unlike most page builders, Gutenberg's really only focused on the content, right? So it's really focused in on how does the post look, how does the page look outside of the sidebar, the header, the navigation, the footer, the widgets. But that's changing. And we've actually just this past week seen a lot of development around what the future of WordPress might look like in terms of themes and in terms of Gutenberg being able to leverage the block-based paradigm in those parts of your website. So imagine, well, actually coming in the next version of WordPress, we're going to have a navigation block. I've been testing it in beta at the moment, and you can insert it just into your post at any point, and you can insert a navigation menu and fill it up with items. So, and we can also do image blocks. So it's not hard to imagine being able to customize your header and put an image block on the left-hand side and throw your logo in there, and a navigation on the right. And similarly in your sidebar, like we have widgets right now. We have the idea of widgets. Well, you probably know that most widgets have a block equivalent already. So why not use blocks for widgets, replace widgets with blocks and being able to reorder them? You can see how the block editor actually fits really, really nicely in those parts of your theme. And that is the direction that WordPress is heading.
But what kind of time frame are we looking at? I mean, somebody who's impatient, because widgets, in my opinion, are pretty annoying. And Gutenberg has spoiled me, and now I think I want a Gutenberg for my widgets. How long are we looking at before we can do this ourselves without a developer?
I think we'll see the widget area transformed into blocks before the end of 2020. It's obviously it's super hard to say with all of these sorts of things, because hopefully the ideal outcome here is not that some person goes and creates it and then releases it and we all have to live with it. The ideal is that there's a whole conversation to be had, that we start talking with theme developers, with agencies, with the end users who want to use these things and figure out how should it work, what's it look like. And so that conversation is just starting. Like I think even this week, just starting. And after that, we'll want to do a bunch of user testing, and we want to take a design-led approach towards this sort of thing. So I definitely, considering that WordPress powers over a third of the web, it's not the sort of thing that you want to rush. It's a big deal.
So what you've just told me is that I'm being very selfish and impatient, and that there's actually a community that needs to make this decision, and I should be a little bit more patient. Sarah, would you agree with that analysis?
Yeah. We don't want to rush into anything.
Yeah, okay. So I mean, and the community, and I think kind of we tend to forget that as people who just use WordPress and we don't get involved in the development. We forget that there's a whole community out there who's developing it and pushing it forward so that people like me don't spoil it.
And I think that's a disconnect that we need that's a gap that we need to bridge, right? Is that there's the development community, and actually most things are discussed on GitHub, which is totally inaccessible to a lot of people, and other things, maybe are developed on the Make WordPress blog, which again, not everybody reads. So I think that as people involved in the Gutenberg project, it's incumbent on us to try and reach you, Jason, and get feedback before really heading in any
sorry, I've just a concept just occurred to me, excuse me, David, and I'd like to ask you about that, because we've just been talking a lot about development. I just said I'm a useless user, but I'm also an SEO practitioner, and that's kind of like three different communities who are all using Gutenberg, who can all benefit from Gutenberg. Today we've talked a lot about development. We've talked a little bit about the content people with Sarah. What about the SEO people?
It's funny, this conversation in the last couple of minutes is the exact opposite of what I've heard over the last year, meaning that it feels like a lot of people have been kind of dragging their feet on adoption. And I think, each individual represents their own point of view, of course. But I think there's a lot of benefits from the SEO perspective. Even this notion of like, I can implement schema markup without having to know a lot of code, and have some level of confidence that that's going to be done right, especially if you use a plugin, say like Yoast, where there's kind of an informed point of view behind that technology. I view that as very helpful to the SEO community, but I think, having also spent time optimizing for search engines, I know that, the SEO's relationship with code and with the site and with the content is very special. And when people start messing with that relationship, people get anxious sometimes. But I think, as Luke pointed out, like, it's the role of the WordPress contributors and committers to make sure that we kind of bring people along and kind of, instead of kind of shoving them to the next stage. And that's tricky business. But I do think there's a lot of value that is available to the SEO community through the Gutenberg editor.
Brilliant. I mean, what I hear out of that is there's a paradigm shift, and we all need to adapt to that paradigm shift. And it's being developer driven. What do you think, Sarah? How can we get people within the content and the SEO community to accept this paradigm shift, which is uncomfortable, as you said, David, and tends to get them to drag their feet?
Well, I think that part of it is taking it slow, making sure that everything is working properly. So when it's released, it's effective, and you get to see the full power of it, and that the product is a good product. And I think that once people, and I feel like that's what's happened. At first it was super scary. It was totally different from what we were used to, but the way that it's unfolded over the past year or so has really helped to encourage everybody to get on board with Gutenberg.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. I think getting everybody on board on Gutenberg, all three communities, there might be more communities. Have I missed any communities, or is it just the three?
Just the entire web's worth of communities. Everyone on the web. You left all of them out.
Well, I've terribly oversimplified. I do apologize. And there's also the C-level people in a company who are worried about costs, and Gutenberg might help with that.
I think so. I mean, I think, the same is true for every other part of the community as it is for the SEOs and as it is for the developers. Time is speed is addictive. When SEOs start using Gutenberg, getting their ideas to market faster, leveraging and scaling and reusing those optimizations and integrations, you don't want to give that up. The CMO of WP Engine doesn't want to go back to 3-week times to create a new design for a landing page. There's nothing about that she wants to recapture.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, once you realize those benefits and use them in production and use them on a new campaign and see that benefit, you can't go back. And so for me, it's just about time to adoption. But as Luke and Sarah pointed out, I'm doing that in a responsible way.
That's absolutely brilliant. So a lovely way to end it is we can't go back. We've got to look forward. Everybody needs to embrace Gutenberg because it's not going away anytime soon. That was a super webinar. Thank you very much. There were a couple of questions. I'm afraid they were too practical for the very end there, where we were getting a bit philosophical and trying to open the discussion up. Thank you for the questions. Thank you to the audience for being here and listening. Thank you, David, for the presentation, which was brilliant. Thank you, Sarah, for your contribution. Loved what you were saying. And thank you, Luke, for getting up in the middle of the night, drinking so much coffee. You won't be getting to sleep anytime soon. That was super duper. Thank you to everybody. And I think we can say goodbye. And a good job done.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.